Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Farmers Weekly webinar, How to Capitalise on Your Existing Trees and Woods. I'd like to apologise for the technical difficulties that caused the postponement of this event a couple of weeks ago, but on the positive side, it has allowed a few more people to register, so some good has come out of that. My name is John Tucker from the Woodland Trust. I'm a chartered forester and have worked for the Trust for the last 28 years with a strong focus on woodland management and woodland creation, both on our own estate and through working with other landowners. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend this webinar, and I'd like to thank very much our three panelists for also taking the time out to join us. They've got a wide range of experience in agroforestry, farming and forestry, and hopefully will stimulate some thoughts for you today about the value of trees and woods on your farm and how to get the most out of them. So to introduce our three panelists, first of all, we have Laura Henderson, Forestry Business Lead for English Woodlands Forestry. Laura took up this role with English Woodlands Forestry in March 2021. Prior to that, she worked with the Forestry Commission on the development of post-cap incentives and forest research on national woodland condition and biodiversity related projects. And she also sits on the CONFOR Advisory Board. That's the Confederation of Forestry Industries. Our second panelist is John Pawsey, Director of Shimpling Park Farms in Suffolk. John is a fourth generation farmer from Suffolk. The farm is a mixed farm with 650 hectares of arable land and 1,000 New Zealand Romney breeding ewes on hand slope series chalky boulder clay. John also farms an additional 980 hectares for neighbouring farmers under farm management contracts. All the farms are managed organically, with the first farm being converted to organic production in 1999. Crops grown on the farm feature an array of legumes and cereals, as well as some specialty organic crops. Diversifications on the farm include an HLS scheme, commercial and domestic rentals, specialist machinery sales, and various renewable energy projects. Our third and final panel member is Jim O'Neill, who's been recently appointed as the agroforestry advisor with the Forestry Commission in England. Jim left Newton Rigg Agricultural and National School of Forestry in 1989, joining the Forestry Commission in Argyll to specialise in harvesting and forest management. He returned to Cumbria as a Forestry Commission woodland officer, where he has worked for over 26 years, working with farmers and landowners, advising on woodland creation and woodland management. Jim led the 2018 Forestry Investment Zone DEFRA pilot, exploring the integration of trees, woodlands and forestry into the farm landscape of northeast Cumbria, developing relationships and novel approaches to incorporate trees on farms. Currently, Jim is the Forestry Commission Agroforestry Advisor, promoting and championing this important integrated land management approach for farmers and foresters alike. The format for today is going to be that each of the panelists is going to give a short presentation for between 5 and 7 minutes. And then after the presentations, we'll open things up for discussion. We've had a huge amount of questions already, so we'll start with some of the advanced questions, but audience members can add questions at any time. Just type them into the box at the foot of your screen, and then I'll direct them to the panel. We'll finish up after that with a short video. So the webinar is expected to last for about 1 hour and 15 minutes. Afterwards, it will be available on demand, and you'll get an email to let you know when the recording is ready for viewing. The running order is going to be Laura first, John, and then finally Jim. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to the first speaker, and that's Laura.
Hello there, everybody. Thank you, John, very much for the introduction, and to Farmers Weekly for inviting me onto the panel. It's very exciting. We've got so much interest in this. I'm sort of pleased that I can't see all of your faces, because by all accounts, that would be rather a lot. But I'm delighted that we've got so many people. I should just make clear that my company, English Woodlands Forestry, is a commercial consultancy operating in the southeast of England. So my experience is very much based in that part of the country. And so I'll just pass on my apologies if any of my answers or experience doesn't relate to the nuance of you being in a different part of the world. So just to crack on, I understand that this webinar follows a previous Farmers Weekly woodland related webinar that was also very popular on the topic of woodland creation. And I'm so pleased that there's such a groundswell of interest in trees and woodlands. And I'm hoping that it marks the beginning of a sort of breakdown in what you could think of as a historic disconnect between farming and forestry. It feels like very exciting times for the forestry industry. And I'm struck that the previous webinar that was held, started by John, as today rather, talked about the need for an owner to identify their objectives when they are considering a woodland creation project. They need to think about what they want the final crop to actually achieve, whether it's going to be timber or recreational needs or flood mitigation or carbon credits. And I think that it's really important that we answer the same question when we're applying it to existing woodlands. What do you actually want to get from them? And I noticed that a thing of interest to me as a commercial consultant is that that's one of the things we have to help our clients with quite frequently. And it surprises me that they don't necessarily have a clear vision for their woodlands. So I would ask you all to think about that, to ask yourself that question: what is it that you actually want the woodlands to achieve? In my role as a commercial consultant, I work with people who have the full gamut of answers to that objective question, from large formal estates to small woodland owners and farmers. And the range of objectives covers timber revenue, game shooting, or other recreational activities, sometimes just legacy for the next generation, public access, because yes, some people do actually encourage it, biomass for their heating, agroforestry benefits, avoiding inheritance tax. I mean, the list goes on and on of what people want to get from their woodlands. And I think it's important to recognise that it doesn't need to be any just one of those objectives that can be achieved. They are definitely not mutually exclusive. But I would also suggest that the one thing that really unites obtaining that objective is good sustainable management. It is that management that will keep the woods healthy, resilient and enduring, and ultimately enable them to realise your objectives. So from a commercial company point of view, we cover a whole range of services for our customers, from writing management plans and doing grant applications through to doing tree risk surveys, as well as organising operational activities such as doing invasive species control or infrastructure projects, and of course timber extracting and marketing. And getting all of that right, as with any of your farming practices, is a combination of your objectives, as I mentioned, environmental sustainability and the economics. It's worth always mentioning in this and not forgetting that woodlands are our most intact terrestrial ecosystem, and woodland edges are one of the best habitats for the pollinators and bird species that we often frequently associate with farmland environments. So they're also busy quietly and effectively contributing to your natural capital, to the soil quality, water management, livestock, well-being, etc., etc. And that sort of intrinsic value mustn't be overlooked. And I certainly don't want this presentation to be seen as a pitch for English Woodlands Forestry as the company I work for, but I would really recommend that anybody interested in woodland does seek professional advice, whether that's to get the right grant, to get the best contractors, or to achieve the best value for any product that you might have in that woodland. There are many consultancies, land agents, forestry consultancies that operate across the country who can give you really sound advice, especially in a market that you may not well. And I'd also counsel that you talk to your local woodland officer from the Forestry Commission. They are free at point of source, which is unusual for the public sector, and you will have a named individual that you can talk to. So go to the people that are there to advise you and make the most of that advice. I feel really that the rationale behind doing woodland management is well understood, certainly in terms of ecology. But what I feel is less well understood, and maybe the rationale behind so much interest in this webinar, is about the economics. Now, the timber market at the moment is incredibly buoyant. It's arguably one of the best times for forestry at the moment. Softwood prices and markets are incredibly competitive, and global trends and all predictions are that there's going to be a dramatic increase in the demand for wood products. So planting trees and getting involved with good woodland management now is important. Also notable is that our own timber supply forecast is on a downward trajectory. So people who do have good timber supplies are likely to be in a win-win situation. The hardwood market is still very much based on firewood and chip, but is attracting good prices. And there's still really strong demand, or not still, there's actually very strong current demand for quality English oak, which is pushed up by the price rises on the continent. I would just say, note the word quality here, because you can't guarantee that it is good quality, and that comes back to getting good advice. So depending on the scale and type of woodland that you have, it could be that you can gain good revenue just as a byproduct of good management. Grants for woodland creation and woodland management are really improving and are very strong at the moment. The Woodland Creation new grant from the Forestry Commission called UCO has very generous uplifts for biodiversity, flood mitigation and woods that are planted near to people. And this year's Countryside Stewardship Grant scheme, which is just closed for applications, but as a marker for the appetite for these things, has very generous uplifts for deer and squirrel management, public access and ancient woodland restoration. And when stacked, which you can do with these new grants, you could treble your standard annual payment from £100 per hectare per year. So you can be looking to get over £300 per hectare if you're eligible. Additional grants are also available for writing management plans, for infrastructure, for tree health. And it's really worth looking into these because they can provide significant benefits. So our company itself doesn't deal with the asset value of the land, but I'm sure that's of interest to some people. We work very closely with land agents, notably here with an agent called Batchelor Monkhouse. Our contact there suggests that the prices for woodland, caveated this is the southeast, can attract £8,000 to £12,000 per acre. But small amenity woodlands can attract really several times that amount, and they do. The market is incredibly buoyant for amenity woodland. And there's a very interesting and good market analysis, which is produced by John Clegg, a land agent, every year, which is well worth looking up about asset value of woodland. You can find it online. Also worth noting that investment managers need to demonstrate that they're meeting environmental, social and governance obligations to which forestry can also contribute. So there is appetite to monetize woods into management, even if there isn't yet an actual metric. So that's just a little snapshot of some of the things that you consider when you're thinking about your existing woodlands and how to capitalise on them. To answer the exam question, or the question of the webinar about how to capitalise on it, I would really suggest that you start back to the beginning of my presentation with think about what your objectives are. From this, probably the next thing would be to produce a management plan, and hopefully that can combine with your broader farm planning to capitalise on the economy of using the same staff, the same infrastructure, the same machinery and that sort of thing. Creating a plan will really help you to address the opportunities and threats in your woodland and give you a time-bound plan of activity. So that's all from me. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion and questions later, so I'll hand back to John. Many thanks.
Excellent, Laura. Thank you very much. That was a really good scene setter. So over to our second speaker, John Pawsey. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. Really, you gave a really great introduction, so I don't need to say much more, but we're a sort of typical arable sort of situation with sort of small woods and copses and hedges. We also got quite a lot of hedgerow trees within those hedges as well. Our main wood is Alpheton wood, which is a triple SI, but we also planted quite a lot of woods in the 1990s. And we have 3 wood chip boilers on the farm, and actually we've been funded with most of the work in the woods in the recent years, really through the RHI and putting wood chip from our own woodland on the farm into those wood chip boilers. So really, what are our focuses with regard to our sort of existing woodlands and their future management? I think actually what's been really interesting is that, you know, the RHI has really put a real value onto our woods over the last sort of 15 years. And actually, you know, we actually haven't been claiming many woodland grants. We've just been sort of attracting the RHI, which has been fantastic. But it also has meant that Alpheaton Wood, which is a SSSI, it's really put some value in that sort of coppice woodland. So the wood is now sort of regenerating rather than being derelict, which is what it was before. And then just sort of thinking about other wood on the farm. So we've got a huge amount of ancient hedgerows on the farm, and we've been sort of rather tightly managing them in the past. And so we've been letting those hedgerows, you know, really grow up. So that eventually they will sort of come into that sort of wood production system on the farm. And I mentioned that we've got, you know, several, you know, old ancient hedgerow trees in there. Many of them have been pollarded, but definitely a future plan would be to plant more hedgerow trees. And also, of course, we're all thinking about this, but understanding the value and opportunities of sequestering carbon. You know, I'm thinking that, you know, there's possibly more value in opportunities through sequestering through wood rather than soil. Also, as far as the environment is concerned, is really understanding the differences between new woods on the farm and established woods, and what they provide for birds, butterflies, invertebrates, mammals, etc. And the wonderful thing about coppicing, of course, is you get this high canopy and scrub, as well as the different areas of the wood sort of regenerate at different times. And you know, and also understanding the difference and the environmental benefit of veteran trees versus young trees. I think that, you know, I spent a week camping in our SSSI with my wife last winter, because we couldn't get away because of COVID. And what became absolutely apparent is our woodlands are essential wildlife banks. And, you know, these are our hubs of species. And what we need to try and do is get those species out into the farmed environment. And with that in mind, we planted our first agroforestry project in December 2021, which was 50 acres. We've essentially sown alleys of trees, 36-meter wide alleys, with the trees planted in 4.5 meter strips. And the species we put in there really mimicked Alpheaton wood, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get those rich amount of species in Alpheaton wood back into the wider countryside. And so we've got common alder, black poplar, goat willow, holly, common oak, common walnut, wild service, aspen, field maple, hazel, hornbeam, rowan, and wild cherry. At the moment, it just looks like sticks and tubes, but I'm just incredibly excited about how it's all going to look in the future. And the reasons for planting it really were, as I said before, providing links to and from our SSSI woodland to get species out into the wider environment, but also to draw species back into Alpheaton wood that we haven't got. Obviously, there's going to be future opportunities for quality timber and also wood chip, looking at sort of increasing productivity from our sheep, who will be able to browse some of those species, but also get shade. Also, because of the alleys, and we're farming organically, so we've got grass lays in the system. You know, maybe there'll be some tourism opportunities as far as getting, you know, people camping within those alleys. And also we do a lot of on-farm trials, and those alleys will also provide a really good sort of backdrop for putting some of our trials on the farm as well. So that's a brief summary of what we're sort of thinking as far as our existing woodlands and their future management is concerned. And I'd like to agree with the speaker before, is that I think it's very exciting, and having woodland on our farms is going to mean something very new and something very special in the future.
John, thank you very much. Excellent. And so to our third and final speaker, Jim O'Neill from the Forestry Commission. Over to you, Jim, please.
Thank you very much. Thanks, John, for that fascinating sort of run through of your farm. I had the pleasure of meeting John on Saturday, and his farm was open to the agroforestry open weekend. I arrived a day early, and he was very kind enough to let me have a walk around on my own, and I took the opportunity to look into your I can't remember the name of it, John, now, the Capitalise woodland, and what a fantastic managed woodland that is. And the pile of timber in the yard and the pile of wood chips feeding your boiler, just shows a perfect opportunity of how woodlands on the farm can be made to pay. It's not very often you see well-managed Capitalise woodlands. Often, people think that you sort of leave them alone for nature to run its course. It can work, and it can be the right thing to do, but very often some form of management will actually enhance the productivity and the biodiversity at the same time. So yeah, over to me. As was mentioned earlier on, for a quarter of a century or more, I was working as a woodland officer in the northeast Cumbria area, so you'll forgive me if my answers are more leaning towards upland livestock sort of landscapes. But particular interest in woodland management and farms came from the forestry investment zone work I did, and that's where we were looking at ways to demonstrate the value of trees, woodland, and forestry to farmers and landowners, for them to undertake some planting or management to assist them in what they do, and that's their day job, and that's farming. You don't have to have having a woodland doesn't mean you have to become a forester. My mantra is always, how can they help you do your day job? And if your day job is a farmer, that's what you should be doing, and you should be looking at opportunities for those woodlands to assist you in that operation. Projects over the years in northeast Cumbria area, focused on utilising farm woodlands and exploring opportunities, new opportunities. For instance, with COVID, glamping is suddenly, and I think John's just perfectly illustrated that with his own holiday in his own woodlands. Glamping pods and shepherd's huts are popping up all over the place in Cumbria. So often you'll find opportunities with woodlands, trees, sort of screening, that sort of thing, that will help you make money from the non-traditional aspects of owning a woodland. So the Forestry Commission support all aspects of forestry, be it grant aid for planning, woodland, planning a new woodland, planning existing management of woodland, and also planting. Plant health is another aspect, and I noticed there's a lot of questions on ash dieback in the chat. So woodland management, yeah, we really do. I can't agree more with Laura and John. We need to manage our woodlands and at least plan your way forward. Sorry, Laura, could you click onto the second slide if you're not already there, because I can't see. So what I would suggest, and it's in tune with what's already been said, take advice, but you decide what's best for you. That's really important. You've got to sit there and consider the advice you've been given, but how does it fit in with your business? Not every advisor that comes across the gate will have be in tune with your own sort of objectives, but you've got to have that discussion so that you align and get that tailored fit advice, if you like. So you've got to consider how trees, woodland, and forestry can play a part on your holding. That's where you've got to integrate this, integrate your land management units. Forestry or farming has been, very, very much a binary choice in many over the years, and it doesn't have to be. They can be much more integrated. So again, forgive me, I'm sort of leaning towards the agroforestry end of the spectrum at the moment, which really interests me, and I think it's a great opportunity to start bringing forestry and farming back together. And some of the benefits of agroforestry, and you can, it doesn't have to be newly planted agroforestry. You can actually use existing resources and trees, woodlands that can deliver against agroforestry. And that is shade and shelter. Obviously, up in the north, which we want shade and shelter from the storm and the winds, but down in the south, you want shade and shelter from the sunlight, perhaps. So trees will have benefits in soil restoration and soil health. Water, again, in the south, shading of the soil can reduce water loss. In the north, it can help intercept water and also sort of percolate it through the soils rather than just running off the fields. Live weight gain and live birth rates, they're really important in the sort of uplands of Cumbria, for instance, where you've got some really severe weather conditions. Your weight gain will go up, so therefore your weight sales at market will be higher, and birth rates will increase, obviously increasing your flock or herd. Egg production has been proven to increase with having trees, and of course you can avoid crop desiccation and grass desiccation. And having just spent the weekend in the Norfolk area, I can see how shade and shelter from the sunlight there can really help. Of course, there's the more traditional end of the spectrum: wildlife, timber, wood fuel, and planning screening, which I've already mentioned. Biosecurity is a really important point. So if you've got neighbours, having a small, strip of woodland along your boundaries will protect your own livestock from perhaps neighbouring issues. And feed substitute. Some willows, you can actually add into to feed for cattle, which can bring medicinal benefits. So really, I think diversification is the chance, if you like. If you've got small farm woodlands, you might not be able to make them massively profitable in the traditional sense, but how do you fit them into the diversification profile of your property? And public goods delivery. I often say to people, don't worry about what the government is after. The government is after carbon, biodiversity, etc., etc. Don't worry about that. When you manage your woodlands or when you plant your woodlands, the government and society and the environment will reap those benefits regardless of what you do, as long as you're doing it in some sort of structured manner and using UK forestry standard as perhaps the guidance behind what you're doing. So I mentioned forestry. Farming doesn't have to be a binary choice, but this is the opportunity we have at the moment. But perhaps I should have started this one really. Why create more woodland on the farm if you're not already utilising what you have? And again, go back to the previous presenters. All the issues in there, you need to be considering what woodlands can do for you. So local area office, Laura's already kindly mentioned the woodland officers. They are free. They're an incredibly enthusiastic bunch. Do contact them, and if they can't help you, I'm sure they will be able to point you towards people who can. And of course, we have many places around the country have woodland initiatives, and they might have free advice as well. Future elm support. I mean, some of the chat, the questions in the chat are all asking about what the current support is and what the future support is. England Woodland Creation Offer is the one thing, is a big driver at the moment, and that will hopefully seamlessly merge into the environmental land management. And in amongst that, there will be woodland management grants as well. They're currently in development, but your input is invaluable. So I'd be really keen to see what the sort of questions and chatter are at the end of tonight, because we can feed those in. Now is the time to do that. So 2024 is the proposed time for the Sustainable Farming Incentive to be launched. So we have an opportunity here. It's okay, there's a bit of waiting to do, but we have an opportunity to build and plan right now, so we're ready to take advantage of the grants once they start in 2024. So I think that's enough from me, and I look forward to the questions in the remaining parts of the session. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks to all three presenters. So we've now got well over half an hour for questions, of which there are a lot. So without further ado, you may not recognise your specific question because we've had quite a number that are around common themes. So I've tried to sort of amalgamate them. So the first question then is around ash dieback. So what financial aid and advice is there regarding ash dieback? What can I cut down and when? And do trees from ash dieback offer any other financial possibilities other than firewood? So over to the panel. I don't know who wants to start first.
I'll happily pick
John,
that up.
perhaps.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead, Laura. You're probably far more sort of conversant with it down in your part of the world than I am, actually. So fire away.
Well, I'll start, Jim, and then do come in. Yes, thanks for the question. There's loads of questions about ash dieback. First of all, that in terms of financial aid, there are Forestry Commission grants to assist with the replanting of ash that's had to be felled due to ash dieback. And again, you can go to your woodland officer to ask advice, or you can look on gov.uk under tree health grants to get a bit more information. That's sort of some standard costs on that. There are some tree health pilots that are running at the moment. They're regional, unfortunately, so they are limited to the Northwest, West Midlands and Southeast and London. But they are looking at helping people with the costs of felling ash, particularly for estates or landowners who can collaborate with their owners, and that's looking to help with costs and including road closures, which can be very significant. So there are bits and pieces of financial aid that are available. In terms of what you can cut down and when, you do need to be considering the need for a felling license. The fact that the trees are diseased does not necessarily mean you don't have to have a felling license, but the Forestry Commission, I know, are really trying to fast track any applications for felling licenses on ash. Just to bear in mind that ash is becoming increasingly dangerous if it's infected. In our company, we have a policy of not hand cutting any ash. When I say hand cutting, I mean with sort of men and chainsaws, or women. So we only use machines now because the material can become very brittle, and you can put a chainsaw into the base of the tree and find that it behaves very erratically. So do be careful and make sure that you get responsible and well insured and safe contractors. Your woodland officer would be the person that would tell you if you need a felling license, and they would then advise on what you can cut and what needs to be replanted and that sort of thing. So I'll stop there and hand over if anyone wants to supplement that answer.
Thank you, Laura. Jim?
Thanks, Laura. I'm not sure if I can add very much to that. It's very comprehensive. Just to mention some money, if you like, yes, the tree health restoration grant is the vehicle, if you like, to restock after felling. You have 2 years to complete it, plus 3 months. You're looking at 1/4 of a hectare minimum size of woodland, and you're looking at native woodland planting capped at £3,500 and non-native capped at £1,750 per hectare. So there is some money to re-establish, but not so much in terms of money to sell as such. But regarding what can you use it for, I was going to ask Laura actually, but I'm not aware of any novel ways of using infected ash other than firewood at the moment. And again, it's sort of out of my wheelhouse a little bit because we're quite behind the curve up in the north, so we haven't had to deal with it so much. But Laura, I don't know if you've got any ideas on other uses for infected ash.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to answer that bit. Generally, unfortunately, it does have to go into the firewood industry. There are some other uses in the industry for it. If you've got good quality timber, and it really does need to be quality, so I'm talking, good straight edges. That it excludes really any field trees or trees on roadways and things. If it is of very good quality, there is a chance that it could be good for the export market. But our general experience is that even in big stands of ash, that the amount of the quantity of quality material coming out is very low. And if it's going to be used for that sort of market, you need quite a lot of it. So you'd be looking at needing sort of upwards of 100 tons to actually get it into that market. There are some innovative projects looking at using the material for things like thermally treated cladding, and I think Vastons are looking into that. So there are increasingly innovative uses for it, but getting your own material into the best market really will be a question of asking your local wood advisors and people who are in the marketing industry around you.
Thank you, Laura and Jim. And I think we'll come back to that question about understanding some of the values in a little bit. So second sort of question was around owning woodland. So we have 30 acres of woodland that has just finished the scheme it was in for the last 20 years. What do we do with it now? Related question, how are we going to meet the ongoing costs of woodland management? And I thought I'd start with you, John, first of all, and just ask you, how did you decide about what you wanted, how you were going to manage your woodlands, what you wanted to get out of them? Did you receive help in sort of thinking about your objectives, and so on? So I don't know if you'd like to have a stab at that one first, and then Laura and Jim can join in afterwards.
Yes, well, the woodlands, the new woodlands that we planted, they were actually 30 years ago, and actually there was one was in the farm woodland scheme, one was in the farm woodland grant scheme. Yeah, they sounded very similar, but anyway. And of course, we planted at the time just because we really wanted to plant some woodland. We farmed partially on an old disused airfield, and we took up the runways, and we were left with this sort of 500 acres of a bit of a blank canvas. So when we planted them actually to ultimately to enjoy them. And so that's what we're doing. It sounds like a slightly sort of flippant answer, but what do you do with them now? You just enjoy them. You love them, and realize the benefit that they are bringing to your farm landscape, because it's bringing species in and out of that area. So I'm sure other people have got better ideas of how you can financially deal with the woodland outside of a scheme, but just love them.
And do you make decisions there about what goes on in your woodland, when to coppice them, for example, yourself, or do you receive advice for that?
I do receive some advice, and those woodlands, which are now 30 years old, actually are coming up for thinning and for coppicing. So, they are, even though we will be enjoying them, but we will be actually managing them to put in our wood chip boilers. Okay.
Thank you. Laura or Jim, anything you wanted to add to that? So ongoing costs of woodland management, sorting out
I'll jump in there, John. And again, I'm sure Laura's got some more practical experience of what she's been doing lately. We're currently in a sort of transition period between countryside stewardship and environmental land management. But the grants are a bit fluid at the moment. But Laura mentioned earlier on, and I would really stress this: whatever you do, make a plan. And it keeps coming back to this, and Laura stressed this as well. You've got to decide what you want your woodlands to do for you. We as foresters can come along and give you a perfectly good silvicultural answer to what you might or might not do with your woodland, but unless it's related to your own circumstance and your own business, and business needs and personal needs, environmental needs as well, we're giving you perhaps the wrong answer. So you've got to consider how they work for you. So a woodland management plan would be a really first good step. Management plans, you can get for the first 100 hectares, £20 a hectare towards, and over that 100 hectares, another £10 a hectare. So there's a reasonable amount of money there to bring in some really good expertise and work with them to tailor the woodland management plan output for your needs. And with that, you'll get felling permissions going forward for as much as 10 years, and you can amend that plan as you go. And again, your woodland officer from the Forestry Commission would be available to talk to throughout that process. So there's a bit of hand holding to go on in there. But yes, I mean, some requirements in countryside stewardship absolutely require a woodland management plan before you can get any grants towards the management of the woodland. and the management can be as much as £1,000 a year for woodlands between 3 and 10 hectares, and another £100 a year for everything over the 10 hectare. So it can stack up. As I say, the grants are in sort of flux, and they've changed quite recently, and will possibly change again going into ELM. There's going to be a sustainable farming incentive and woodland management standard, so that will be a sort of basic grant. If you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get so much money. But if you want to enhance that, you go into the next tier of ELM, which is the local nature recovery, and that will bring more opportunities and perhaps advice opportunity as well. So you can get some tailored advice outside the normal sphere, if you like. So there's lots of opportunity to go in there and seek advice and get some sort of plans drawn up, and I would really urge that would be the main starting point. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jim. Laura, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. And definitely endorse everything that Jim has just said. And that would have been my starting point. I mean, there are grants obviously available, and they can be very beneficial. But it's always, it's always a shame if you feel like you've got to just chase grants. So I would also encourage people to think about their farming and forestry more holistically. Are there, for you to actually identify whether there are ways in which you can use your existing staff resource, or perhaps adapt your kit and think about your infrastructure and access more holistically across the whole of the holding. I think this disconnect between forestry and farming in some circumstances has meant that people haven't enabled themselves to think on that sort of more whole holding scheme. And I have been to a couple of farms where they've really done that incredibly successfully. So if the weather conditions aren't good enough for them to be picking their crop or whatever, then they get their staff in processing firewood, for instance. So think holistically also across your whole holding to see if you can make savings in that way.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Moving on to the next question. Am I able to use my woodland to farm free-range pigs and chickens? Is there any grant support to buy equipment to work in it? And I guess the second part of the question is related to the free-ranging of animals, but also in general, if somebody wants to do work within their woodlands, needs machinery, is there any grant support out there to help them acquire that? Jim, I guess if I could start with you on that one.
Yeah, certainly. I would say if they're your woodlands, and to some degree you can do what you would like to do with them within reason. There are some sort of, you could call them planning rules, the forestry regulations which do determine what you may or may not do without sort of permission. That might be a felling permission, what have you. But in regards to this question, free ranging of chickens, hens in a woodland, I would say is a perfectly acceptable sort of pastime. You might want to consider taking advice if you have something like an H&7 natural woodland and there's some really interesting flora in it might be counterintuitive to send them in there and perhaps destroy an understory that's really valuable. So again, it comes back to that whole advice thing. But agroforestry can be planting new trees and new endeavours with livestock and crops, or it could be existing woodlands that could be utilised. And certainly in the fells of Cumbria, a lot of the upland woodlands have been used for livestock shelter for many centuries, and that's a form of agroforestry. It's no different. And I think sort of this in the last century, we've lost that interactivity between woodlands and farmland, possibly due to intensification of agriculture. But I think if we went back more than a century, we'd find much more sort of interactive use of all the resources on the farm, and that includes tree canopies as well. So regarding the grant aid for equipment, I'm not quite sure what equipment you're referring to. I'm not aware of anything presently at the moment. There can be the odd grant here and there with regard to certain initiatives, and certainly we've had them in Cumbria. We had a thing called Forest Futures where we were paying for equipment, but on a national basis, I'm not aware of anything at the moment. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. John or Laura, anything to add to that?
I mean, the only thing I would say is that obviously in a triple SI, you've obviously got to be very careful with what you do. Is when, as Jim said, with sort of valuable sort of flora and fauna. And just to back up Jim's point, I mean, the agroforestry, as far as we're concerned, I think will give us opportunities to provide a better sort of welfare situations for our sheep, but also, and it's quite common for people to drag chicken arcs, free range chicken arcs up and down those agroforestry alleys. So I'm really keen to explore those areas.
Thank you very much.
I could just jump in as well, John.
Yeah,
actually,
sure,
yeah. So obviously, there is a question about grants here and getting sort of funding for kit. The local enterprise partnerships can sometimes help with kit and machinery. I don't know what's available at the moment, if anything. Equipment grants from the Forestry Commission sort of come and go, and I think that the current countryside productivity grants are closed. But as there's a lot of interest in grants, anyone on the call may want to sign up to the Forestry Commission e-alert. Doing quite a lot of good advertising for the FC at the moment, but I did used to work for them and I'm very fond of them and the stuff they do, obviously. So if you go onto Google and just put in Forestry Commission e-alert, you can sign up, and it's specifically about their grants and regulations. And they just will ping you information when these things open, and there's new information to receive, and you don't get inundated. You don't get thousands of things into your inbox, so that could be worth a punt.
Okay, thank you. Moving swiftly on, we've got quite a big chunk of questions around how do I work out how much timber is worth? How can I market small quantities of timber? How do I find good contractors and timber merchants? And we've already touched on the need for sort of management. So I'd be interested in anybody answering sort of questions there, and also talking about deer, squirrel management. John, I seem to recall you've got quite big deer issues in your part of the world, for example. So yeah, your thoughts on that sort of area would be most welcome.
Sorry, do you mean about deer management?
Yes, yeah. And the impacts on your wood.
Yes,
why you need to do it.
We really used the Deer Initiative in the days when it was around, and actually just engaging with local landowners, because I mean, you can keep on top of the deer or keep the numbers down to a reasonable level on your own farm, but it really it's vital that landowners work together on this thing. And it is a problem, I have to say. And we had to fence our wood entirely to keep the wood out. The fence has been up for about 20 years, and there are one or two holes in the fence, and I'm quite happy about that, because it allows mammals and to go through the wood as they always have done. But it's just keeping the deer out. With our agroforestry, that's going to be one of the big challenges, because they not only nip out the tops, but they try and pull it off the cones and rub against the sticks. So it's collaborating with neighbours and making sure that everyone's doing their bit.
Okay, thank you. Laura, did you want to say anything on the timber side about how do you work out how much wood might be worth, how they can get in touch with the right contractors and timber merchants?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. It's a question we get asked a lot, and it's a very difficult question to answer. Nobody on the call will be surprised to say that you should ring your local commercial consultant, of course. But, slightly joking apart, this is the same as when you have anything to sell. You do need to go to the people that are marketing the product, and you probably need to get a few people to come and give you some estimates. I mean, a question of, what's the best way to market small quantities? What does small mean? And in this context, also, what does timber mean? Because if you're talking about a few, really prime, fantastic, large, straight Douglas fir trees, it's one thing. If you're talking about a small amount of chipwood, it's another. So that your local people who are in the market will be able to get the best market for you, challenge them on what is the best market and how they are determining what that is, and get a couple of opinions. I'm afraid it probably does really come down to that. I mean, the difference in price between low quality chip at sort of, £3 per tonne standing up to, standard sort of good hardwood at £70 per tonne standing gives you some sort of sense of you need to find out what you've got, because it's very easy for people to come along and just for the ease of harvesting and what have you, just say, oh, it'll all go into the chip market. So do get good advice. I'm sorry I can't be more helpful without the specifics.
No, that's really useful. Jim, anything to add in that area?
Yeah, certainly we've been looking up in Cumbria, and I know there are other initiatives around the country. We have a group called Cumbria Woodlands, and they've been a fantastic source of information to the industry and to the farming community. And we've had collaborative work with the Farmer Network and Cumbria Woodlands, so they're better understanding, the needs of farmers and woodlands on farms. So I would really urge you to see if you have an initiative in the area that is focusing on trees and woodlands. It's a great start, and perhaps as impartial as you'll get. But other than that, you need to be speaking to the consultants and contractors, as Laura suggested. And if I might just go back a step, Laura was mentioning Forestry Commission sort of information. I think, damning with faint praise here, but the gov.uk website is not too bad. I generally find stuff in there when I look for it. So if you go into gov.uk and you're writing in woodland management grants or woodland creation grants, you will generally find it. And not too bad in inverted commas is how I would recommend it. But it certainly could be a lot worse, and it's not a bad starting point. And you'll certainly find the access to your local Forestry Commission officers, and if you can't get anywhere before that, they will be able to point you in the right direction. They'll certainly know of any woodland initiatives in the area you might be living, and hopefully you can make a start with them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We've had a lot of questions around the issue of carbon credits. So again, I've tried to amalgamate them. What are the prospects for a carbon credit generation system for improved management of existing woodland? So at the moment, carbon credits are related to newly planted woodland creation sites. What is the current price for carbon credits, and what is the minimum size to make carbon credits worthwhile?
Well, if I could jump in again, yes. John, please. I'll start with the fundamental question, sort of answer, if you like, with regard to existing woodlands. Currently, we only have a market for new woodlands, and there are a couple of reasons for that. And there are other countries in the world that have markets for carbon with existing woodland. But the reason why we don't is that we have laws against deforestation. So we have existing woodlands that should remain in perpetuity against deforestation, and that's all bases back to the 1967 Forestry Act, and we have environmental impact assessment regulations for forestry. So in reality, we shouldn't need to pay for sort of that protection of that woodland, and that's where we differ from places like Brazil, for instance. They'll pay for protection of woodland because they're deforesting, and that's where they're able to generate their money. So in reality, I can't see a massive change in this country. You may be able to get money from woodland management grants, of course, but that's not the same as carbon credits. So the carbon credit system, I think, is wedded to creation of woodland that would not have happened had you not got the carbon money to make it happen. That's the sort of starting point of why carbon credits are paid for creating new woodland. If it wasn't going to happen because you couldn't afford it, then that's where the carbon money comes in, and that's a horrible word called additionality, and that's you have to prove the additional sum of money was required and needed to make that project happen. So it's really based upon new woodlands and not existing woodlands at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. John or Laura, did you want to add anything about the carbon market?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is that it obviously is ratcheting up the policy agenda as well as the sort of economic and sales agenda. It's still a very young industry, so it's not massively well understood. I think the sorts of values that are, well, the Woodland Carbon Guarantee Auction Scheme is a government-led scheme that was designed to try and galvanise interest in the market and get the market going. And I think that was last advertised as selling units at about £20 per tonne. The forecast is that amount will rise dramatically over the coming months, and that forecasters are anticipating between £60 and £100 per tonne sort of values, but heavily caveated with that this is a forecast that is not based on reliable data. It's quite speculative. I think there's quite a lot of appetite to monetize in somehow woods into management, because the corporate investors are certainly interested in not just carbon, but in projects that can also deliver on biodiversity and recreational benefits and natural capital more generally. So I think probably we'll be looking at a system where that is monetized for existing woodlands, but I doubt that it will be on the basis of just carbon, for the reasons that Jim has said. It's worth also, if people are interested, the Forestry Commission published, it was in 2017, so it's a little bit old now, but it was a research note that is basically a research note on how to assess investment returns from carbon and timber in woodlands. It's called that. It's called Assessing the Investment Returns from Carbon and Timber in Woodland from 2017. You can search for it online. And just as a bit of background reading on how this investment is likely to take place and how you make the carbon value assessments in your woodland and for timber, it's a really interesting document. It gives a really, really helpful background to understanding it all. So I would recommend people have a look at it just for your benefit. Again, it's called Assessing the Investment Returns from Carbon and Timber in Woodland from the Forestry Commission.
The only thing I would add is that obviously if you're doing a carbon audit for your business, you can obviously use your woodland as sequesterers of CO2, so you can get yourself nearer to net zero.
Thank you, John.
John, actually, sorry, just to come in, it is a really important point that I should have made, is that people must be aware that their own responsibility to hit net zero may be met by their own woodland. So don't necessarily always rush to sell it if you think you're going to need it for your own balancing.
Thank you all. Yeah, the current price, or the last round of the Forestry Commission's Woodland Carbon Guarantee, I think the price was $18.62 per tonne, and we've had questions about how much carbon will be sequestered over the lifetime of a wood. It could be anywhere between 200 to 350 tonnes per hectare over that 100-year period, so you can work the sums out from there. I think it's definitely an area where professional advice is really, really important. Jim mentioned the word additionality. I still get really confused with what it all means. So there are some really good consultants and agents out there. So I strongly recommend you approach them to discuss that. So
I keep jumping in. But part of the reason why it's such a difficult thing to advise on, especially in this sort of forum, is that the carbon balance will be utterly dependent on species choice, yield class, so where you're planting it and the quality of your soil and your management regime. So it's just not a simple thing that anyone can answer in this sort of context.
Yeah, no, very good point. Thank you. So just changing the tone of some of the questions now. We've had quite a few around, please can you recommend economical tree surrounds to protect field trees planted, to protect field planted trees for mitchie cows? So that was the first part of the question. The second part was, are there ways to protect saplings other than plastic tree guards? If so, are they more expensive and how much? So who would like to start on that?
I can jump in there, John. In Cumbria, we're Natural England doing an awful lot of wood pasture creation presently, and they've come across a product called Cactus Guard. I think they originate in South Africa, and they are basically tall, almost like barbed wire sort of cages, if you like. They are incredibly sharp, and you need to wear sort of decent protection when you're working with them. I think erected, they're looking at around about £60, and that's including labour, planting, etc., etc. Currently, they're planting them using 3 sort of fairly flexible concrete rebar sort of poles, if you like, the metal poles. I think 8 mil or thereabouts. And on the Lowther estate near Penrith, they've got longhorn cattle in there, and they're not bothering them at all. The sheep aren't bothering them. There's no wool on the barbs. So Cactus Guards are the current, if you like, sort of newish product, I suppose it is. And as regards the non-plastics, I mean, this is a massive discussion at the moment, and the race is on to try and find an alternative to plastic guards. There's 2 things happening. I think Tubex, which are probably the most well-known tree guards in the country and have been for many decades, I think they've made a step in the right direction in that they're recycling their tree guards now. So they haven't got a biodegradable one as such, but they are taking them in and recycling and to create the next generation. So it's a small step, but it's a step in the right direction. There are all sorts of products, paper products, and other things like wool mixed with cashew oil, for instance. I'm not aware of how long they'll last because it's early days, but there's an awful lot of things going on. They're expensive, probably at least double the price of a Tubex guard, but that I suppose will only come down as the usage goes up. So yeah, there are alternatives. They're not proven yet, and we'll have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Jim. John or Laura, anything to add?
Well, I'd be interested to know if John, how John protected his trees when he planted them. But yes, just to endorse what Jim has said, we're involved in some trials, as are quite a lot of other planters, of some of the biodegradable tubes that are, now coming out onto the market. I think it is a little bit of a watch this space, but there are various different types. The other thing that we are trialing, and I don't, this is not an advert for any of these products, but there is a product called Trico, that's TRICO, which is a spray made of sheep fat and nut oil that you can spray onto the apical tip of your young saplings, and it deters deer from eating them. I don't have vast amount of experience about how successful it is, but I've heard good things, and we're trialing it this year. So there are other options out there, certainly worth looking into. Also to note, with the expense of the new biodegradable tubes, as Jim mentioned, they may be as much as twice as expensive, but we've had estimates for recycling plastic tubes as expensive as £1 per unit. So when you add the cost of actually recycling them and obligations under planting schemes to make sure that you do that, the expense of not just the environmental expense of using the plastic, but also the economic expense of recycling them is not inconsiderable.
Thank you, Laura. John, anything to add?
No, I've been busily making notes actually, because I mean, we use the Tubex product on some of our spiral guards, but a lot of the guards that we use in our agroforestry system weren't recycled. And, the only way to get around it actually is to fence the whole area, which is incredibly expensive. But no, it is a problem, and I just hope somebody solves it soon.
Thank you very much. I think we're rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to ask one quick question and then come to each of the presenters just to give their final thoughts about what would be the key issues for them if they were advising a landowner on how to assess the value in their woodlands. What are the first steps they should do? So the first quick question. Is there a financial return on planting willow? If not, what trees can be planted instead? And then we'll ask each of you for a quick answer on that, and then go around the table for final thoughts. So who wants to start on the willow question?
Well, I'll jump in.
Go on then, Laura.
I was faltering because we don't actually have many willow plantations in the southeast. I think it probably is more of a northern thing that is planted, particularly for sort of short rotation coppice, and it can have some success. And there are schemes that have planted it for biomass. It can also have significant wildlife value if done well and if well managed. Willow can host an enormous amount of species. You have to be very careful of water requirements. The water requirements on it can be more demanding than a lot of agricultural crops, so you've got to be quite careful and get good advice. And you have to plant it at relatively big scale to make it economical. You're probably looking at a sort of minimum of 2 hectare blocks, absolute minimum. So in terms of other trees, anything, as long as it's appropriate to the site and it's appropriate to your objectives. So sort of sky's the limit on that. But you just, always keen to emphasize it's got to be the right tree in the right place for the right reason.
Thank you very much, Laura. Jim, anything to add on the willow topic?
Yeah, I'll jump in as well. So yes, we have some successful short rotation coppice willow up in Cumbria, and that's privately financed through a company called Igesund, which is a big paper mill over on the west coast of Cumbria. And they actually, there aren't any grants available for it, but they're entering into contracts with farmers to feed their incredibly huge sort of kiln, which they dry various, all the timber that goes in. So that is a successful project. But I would also draw your attention to the other end of the scale, where you could plant things like cricketback willow. And if you can grow cricketback willow in a sort of agroforestry situation, so you've got cattle or perhaps crops sort of underneath as an understory, you can grow some timber trees really, and you're looking at a decent cricketback willow. It depends on where you are, and of course, exactly what Laura said. You want to be careful because they can use an awful lot of water, so you've got to be careful where you plant it. You look at the bottom end of a cricketback willow. If you can imagine, if you get your arms around it, it's big enough to fell. You're looking at £300 per butt. That's the bottom end of the tree, so 12, 14 feet butt. So two very different ends of the willow spectrum there.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, I live down in the southeast of England in Sussex, and there's quite a lot of cricketback willow around here. And if you're planting it at 10-metre spacings, 100 trees per hectare, so that £300 to £350 a tree at sort of after 17 or 18 years is good value. So it can be a good market. Okay, so just in the last few minutes then, I'd be really interested just in any final thoughts from the three presenters. What should people be thinking about if they're starting to look at their woodlands? What are the first steps they should be taking? So where should we start? Laura, would you like to start? Sorry to pick on you first.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's just really bringing together everything that we've all been saying, I think. I would really encourage people to identify and engage with the intrinsic value of your woodland as it stands, what it offers you and your farmland, and what it is doing for the biodiversity just by nature of being there. So recognise that. Identify your objectives. It's a really important part of the process. Work out what it is that you want from those woodlands, get some advice, and then plan. That's really my sort of 4-point lead into to reaching what you want.
Thank you very much. Beautifully succinct. John.
I would say, the RHI has been completely game changing for our ancient woodland, and I suppose I would like to see that sort of continued. I think, as Jim and Laura have said, woodland management plan is absolutely essential. Also, you've got to have an idea of your end market, your timber, or what your trees can offer you in terms of on-farm diversification. And don't forget hedgerows. We need to manage our hedgerows better for timber.
Thank you very much. And last but by no means least, Jim.
Thank you. I would say this, being in my current role in agroforestry, integrated land management would be my parting thought. Look at the whole of your holding, and that includes your buildings and other assets. See how they all work together and see how each element can contribute towards your business. And hopefully trees, woodland and forestry can be part of that and become a really integral part of how you manage the whole of your land holding.
Thank you very much, Jim. So thank you to all the three panelists. That's been a really excellent discussion. I would say to people, really talk to the Forestry Commission, as has already been suggested. Talk to neighbours that have undertaken woodland management, that have used contractors. What's their experience been? So get as much advice as you can to begin with. Understand your woodland, think about your objectives and get a management plan. So thank you very much. I look upon this webinar as just very much the start of a discussion. So thank you all very much for attending. Thank you again for the presenters, for their time and expertise. And we're just going to finish the session now with a very short case study video. So Laura, over to you. Thank you.
I'm Roger Howison. I'm the farmer here at Parkhill Farm in Newborough, Fife, Scotland. The existing forest consists of about 2.5 hectare native woodland with sycamore, beech and Scots pine and larch in it. And then we have little pockets of trees right around the farm. We also have 2 strips of trees up on the hill that my great-grandfather planted in the early 1900s, which are classed as woodland grazing, so the trees are spaced out and there's grass growing in amongst it. So going back to our primary objective, we wanted to link all these pockets of trees up to make one big wildlife corridor, going from the top of the hill, going right down to the river bank. We wanted to plant trees that would help create more shelter belts to provide more shelter for the livestock. So hopefully they can stay out on the fields for a little bit longer, and come out onto the fields earlier in the spring. We think the farm looks much nicer with forest and trees on it, so we wanted to plant more trees so it looked more natural, just a nicer place to look at, nicer place to walk through as well eventually. We've planted apple trees, so that hopefully one day that will give us another source of revenue, so essentially another cash crop on the farm. With our traditional orchard, they're very compact together, and it's a very humid environment, so we read that that's quite prone to disease and fungus. And we're trying to reduce the amount of chemicals that we put on the farm in general, so on all the crops. I don't like to use insecticides or pesticides, and we're trying to reduce the amount of fungicides and herbicides that we use. So having the trees in rows like they are, the wind goes through it, so it's not as humid, so less chance for disease to set in. So we'll take a hit on the yield. We won't get as many apples as we would do if we'd planted a traditional orchard, but that didn't bother us. The overall motivation for reducing the amount of chemicals we put was the driving factor of doing it like this in strips. Without trees, the farm would look slightly bland, slightly unnatural. That's I probably can say that because I'm here all the time and I get used to what it looks like. Planting the trees, it gives you a much bigger positive outlook on the future, because every year the landscape is going to change in a positive way because the trees are going to get bigger and bigger. So, and that's a great thing to have that feeling all the time.